Good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending our session. As you can see, we will be talking about the impact of domestic violence on tribal children, and we'll be talking about our Batters Intervention Program. My name is Desiree Coyote. I am the Family Violence Services Program Manager for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I have a little over 23, 24 years of serving victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and have been the program manager for the tribe since 2002. I'm an enrolled member of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and I'll have later ladies introduce themselves before we get started.
Hello, my name is Enola Dick. I am the advocate for domestic violence and sexual assault. I'm one of the newest people to the program here with the Family Violence Services. And I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes.
Good afternoon, my name is Shelley McClure, and I'm the Batter Intervention co-facilitator. I come from Colville Indian Reservation. I've been here since a little over a year, about a year and a half.
So our piece in regards to domestic violence, we're going to go through this very basic, and then we're going to talk about the impacts on children. I'm sure looking at the agenda that you've already seen and sat through a lot of impacts on children, violence in children. We're going to cover a few pieces of that and kind of what services we do provide. And then Shelley will be talking about the Batters Intervention Program that we facilitate here on the reservation. So, domestic violence, as you know, touches everyone's lives. It's not your family, your relations, definitely your neighbors, your community. And the impact is a lifetime impact, not just on the victim themselves, but also on the children. When it's not looked at in a way that's meaningful from the context of the children, it can cause a lot of mental and physical health difficulties. So part of our addressing that is this. Before we get into the children's piece, I do want to show a video from National Institute of Justice.
The stories of American Indians and Alaska Natives are as varied and nuanced as the people themselves. But the latest study from the National Institute of Justice finds
Tech savvy in the room.
one troubling through line that links these stories: the experience of high rates of violence. Like songs and oral histories, science can raise awareness by quantifying the severity of violence. It's time to hear what the numbers are saying. The vast majority of American Indian and Alaska Native women and men have experienced violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 3 have experienced recent violence in the past year. Those levels are higher than the general population, but that's not where the inequalities end. The study also measures a range of impacts as well as services needed because of violence. What's behind those numbers? Let's start with the finding that for American Indians and Alaska Natives, violence doesn't discriminate by gender. Women and men share similar rates of victimization. That means almost 3 million American Indian and Alaska Native women and men have been victims of violence. To put that number in perspective, imagine if everyone in the state of Iowa stood up, or every resident of Orlando, Dallas, Detroit, Anchorage, and Atlanta combined. That's the scale of the violence, but what about the scope? The NIJ study breaks types of violence into 4 categories, and violence against American Indians and Alaska Natives is high across all of them. Take stalking, for example. It can be a gateway to more aggressive violence, and repeated, unwanted, fear-inducing experiences come in many forms. Lifetime estimates of stalking for women in the study are almost double those of non-Hispanic whites. Add male and female victims together, and that's more than 1.2 million people. That would fill 20 sports stadiums if every single ticket holder had been stalked. Being forced or coerced to engage in unwanted sexual activity is another form of violence, a form all too familiar to American Indians and Alaska Natives. For example, these mothers, daughters, and sisters face almost 2 times the risk of sexual violence with penetration as non-Hispanic white women. Overall rates of physical violence by intimate partners in the past or present are even higher, from being shoved to having a gun or knife used on them. More than 1 in every 2 women and more than 1 in every 3 men have experienced physical violence by intimate partners in their lifetimes, comparatively much higher than the physical victimization rates over the lifetimes of non-Hispanic whites. Of course, not all violence is sexual or physical, so the NIJ study also examines psychological aggression. For example, expressions of anger that seem dangerous or humiliating, or controlling access to birth control. Overall, psychological aggression affects more than 1 in every 2 women and men. Psychological aggression may not be as obvious as broken bones or bruises, but it is real. Among victims, 63% of women report partners tracking them, and 55% of women report being kept from family or friends. These are just a few findings, but remember, they are numbers that correspond to real victims who would feel the entire state of Iowa. Now picture if 97% of women and 90% of men in Iowa were victimized by people of other races and ethnicities, interracial perpetrators who violated the safety of their schools, workplaces, parks, homes, and bedrooms. Numbers alone don't tell the whole story, but they do point to a dangerous gap. Most federally recognized tribes don't have the legal authority to criminally prosecute non-Indians, even for crimes committed on tribal lands. So what does it all mean? The impacts of high rates of violence against American Indians and Alaska Natives range from missed days of work or school to physical injuries. It's not surprising that services are needed, like medical care to treat injuries. But here's where the NIJ results uncover another glaring disparity. Almost 40% of female victims who need services can't get them, compared with only 15% of non-Hispanic white female victims who fall through the cracks. American Indians and Alaska Natives deserve better, and now there is science to prove it. These numbers are not abstract. They bear witness to real people, mothers, girlfriends, brothers, and grandfathers. Our hope is that this study will lead to a story of a new beginning, one where all of us listen to what the science is saying, what the victims are saying, and unite to prevent violence wherever it happens.
Very brief information around domestic violence in tribal communities. How many of you are aware of domestic violence in your arena? This little report just gave basic information around what types of domestic violence actually occurs. And I'm sure many of you are already aware. The numbers, of course, for tribal nations are much higher than any other race as far as surviving domestic violence. When it comes to intimate partner violence, unfortunately, the numbers show that tribal nations women are perpetrated against by non-natives much higher than any other race. Because of the way the system is set up, it made it difficult for tribal nations to be able to hold non-natives accountable for their actions. The Umatilla Indian Reservation is one of a few tribes who now have that jurisdiction. Now, I'll hand it off to Enola to talk about children.
Hello, for those of you who came in late, my name is Enola Dick. I am the DV advocate here for Family Violence Services. I'm thinking some of you attended the ACEs this morning, so you probably heard a lot of the symptoms that children do experience. But children are exposed to domestic violence in their home in many different ways. They may witness their parents fighting. They may witness the one parent physically abusing the other. They may witness their siblings being beat, or they themselves might be being physically abused by a parent or somebody in the home. Native children can be exposed to pornography by an adult in the home, whether it's the mom or dad, or they also sometimes are exposed to parents having sex in front of them. The rates of molestation of children in the home by family members, trusted neighbors, relatives, that's one of the exposures that Native children do face in the homes. And then they're also maybe exposed to drugs and alcohol use by their own parents or by a relative in the home who's visiting. So, and then the parents may be under the influence when the violence occurs. So a lot of the domestic violence does happen after the use of alcohol or drugs. We have a quick video. And I want to warn you, this is pretty graphic sounding. It's a 911 call, so we just want you to kind of prepare yourself.
My mommy is having a light. Are you getting her? Stop it! This is bullying, Mommy. Stop it! Okay, we're going to be there. What's going on? They're having a fight because this has been going on forever and ever. How's he hurting her? He makes some red marks on Mom. Where did he make the red marks on? Yes. What's the matter? Is your mom?
hold for an interpreter. Well, sure, you have to wait for the...
So as you can hear, the trauma that these young children are experiencing when they call the 911 operator for help, some of the impacts on them is, and little children, people don't realize the impact that it really has on their brain development. They wind up being in what's called the survival mode in the lower part of your brain, which is survival, fight, flight, or freeze mode. Some of the other behaviors they have are anxiety, depression, anger at one parent or another, or difficulty in school, having a hard time concentrating. When they're stuck in the fight or flight survival mode, they have a really hard time getting that executive area of the brain to working, to be able to think, to concentrate, to make decisions. And also it impacts their ability to regulate their own emotions. And so they may be acting out in school, anger, they may be emotional, they may just isolate also. Also, I don't know, you guys have probably attended some of the ACEs. I think they had a presentation on ACEs and how that study has proved that there's 10 to 13, I think there's new categories up to 13 of when a child or a person experiences these, like domestic violence, alcohol and drugs, the loss of a parent, going to jail, health, that it has a long-term effect on their health. And the health incomes are, their poor health outcomes are very impacted. And they've had study after study that has shown that now. That's one of the things that we really would like to reduce is the children being exposed to violence. One of the things also is some of their, what I have experienced working with tribal children is some of them do act out in school, they're fighting in school, they miss school, they wind up having a fear of police, they have a hard time connecting with their own siblings. Like I said, they're emotional, but a lot of it is also they have, some have poor school outcomes because of the concentration. Part of our program, Family Violence Services, our program is a community-based advocacy, and so our program works with mothers of domestic violence or families from domestic violence. Our program is free. We have a 24/7 service that they can call me 24 hours any day of the week, and I'll be there to assist them. Normally it's the police who call me. They call the police and the police call me and they tell me where to go, and so I go there as soon as I get a call. We are victim-centered, what they want to feel safe, so that's what we work around. Our service is a first come, first served basis, is voluntary. They can be a part of our program as long as they want, and they can leave when they feel like they've got the services they need or have found some of the program. There's the different other types of systems are the medical advocates. They help them through all the medical proceedings that a person has to go through, doctor appointments, insurance, getting other services, referrals. Law enforcement also has crime advocates. And then there's a prosecution. They help the victims of crime. They help them through the court process, through testimony, when they have to go, and the status of the court hearings. These are limited services where ours goes, theirs usually end if they've gone to court or the case has been prosecuted. In our program, there's no limit. How we assist victims is we really mostly want to make sure they're safe. If they're not safe in their home, We try to find them a relative that they can go to, or if they need, we can refer them to a shelter, and we help them to call the shelter and transport them to the shelter. We teach them about their rights, tribal and state protection orders. We talk to them about, do they want a restraining order? How long a restraining order lasts. There's about 5 different types of restraining orders that you can have. One is for a family member, one is for sexual assault, one is intimate partner, and then one is for the protection of your child. So we assist them with that. I sit down and help them. They have to fill it out though, but I walk them through it so that they can do the protection order. If they need to have it extended in the courts, we go and sit in court with them also to want to have another hearing to either extend it or add or change the restraining order some. Our program also refers our clients to other services in the community. Say if they would rather be in Hermiston rather than in Pendleton, and there's somebody closer there, if there's a shelter there that they'd like to go to. We do soft or warm handoffs. So I usually call, get a referral, and I'll go meet them and introduce them and do introductions instead of just sending them alone. We help clients with housing, food, gas. I'll help transport them if they need to look for an apartment. I'll help them look online for places, for jobs, and other resources that are available to them. The Human Resources does have a $1,200 domestic violence grant that I can refer them to Human Services, take them out there, and then they can fill out the application. And that again helps them to get back on their feet, helps them get a home, furniture, and clothing, and things that they need from the home. Because a lot of these families, if they're leaving everything behind. You know, and they have a lack of clothes, shoes, school stuff, cooking things. So that's some of what we do with the clients. Like I said, with court, we help them with court. In custody cases, when the father or the person they're leaving wants a custody hearing, and some of our clients have felt very powerless in this process because the abuser has really manipulated the court system, and they've just felt like, oh, they have all the power, there's nothing I can do. So we walk them through that process. We refer them to legal aid if they need. And we do as much as we can to empower them, because I've had several women who've been just so stressed out and depressed about feeling so powerless that even one of them said, I feel suicidal because I feel like there's nothing I can do. And it was so sad to hear that. So I referred her to another lawyer who also gave her tips. And then when we went to court the next time, she had all her ducks in a row, and she was so confident. It was just really nice to see that she went from feeling so powerless and hopeless to feeling empowered, that there's something that she can actually do to stop this. So that's pretty much what I do with some of my clients. What we do see when working with clients is what I have seen is the children being anxious. The little boy, I had a client whose partner abused her, had strangled her, and she had about 5 children. And one of the youngest boys, who was a child of the abuser, what he had seen, he was anxious. It's like he always felt like they had to be home. It's like, Mom, we need to be home, we need to be home. And then it switched to, he didn't want to go home because then he didn't feel safe there. To see the switch from, we gotta be home so nothing bad happens, to, if we go home, something bad might happen. Again, children blame themselves. They think they may be the cause of the domestic violence. Teenagers tend to isolate. They don't want to talk about their feelings. They may be embarrassed from the police being seen at their home, their neighbors or other relatives, their friends seeing them there. And like you heard in this video, the 911 call, how protective children are of their parents. I had a client from out of state, and her son is the one who motivated her to leave that state and come here to get away from her abuser. So all children are protective of their parents, and that, as you heard in the video again, that they're all traumatized by it. They're all scared, you know, and they want help to get out of that situation. And it is very, very hard for them. Other services that we provide for the benefit of youth and children is we do referrals for the children for counseling at the clinic here or outside. We have a Nick Yahweh Youth Leadership Against Violence program that we've had in the school with some of the young ladies there. Last year they did a bystander accountability, and so they went around and interviewed different people in the community, and then they presented it at one of our conferences. We also take them to domestic violence conferences and youth conferences. We're starting up another program with them at the new school here this next month. So it's really kind of based on what do they want, but we talk to them about relationships, healthy relationships, self-esteem, and one of the relationships is your relationship with yourself, and how do you feel about yourself? Because we know also that a lot of our clients come in with very low self-esteem when the batterer has told them repeatedly, nobody wants you, nobody's going to help you. And the children hear this too, or they're verbally abused also. So self-esteem is a big part of also our program at the high school, and asking them, what do you want out of this? What do you want to give back? And we've had girls graduate last year who were really proud to be in the program and to know that they have the skills that they can go out and they can help their friends, because we let them know, you're a female, you're going to have a friend, a family member, or yourself are going to experience or know somebody who's experienced domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault. And the more you know, the more you're also able to reach out to your friends and family members. So I think that's it for my part of the program. I'll give this to Shelley as our Better Intervention program.
So a little bit of history about how our program came about. We have community members that were concerned about people that were perpetrating against their partners. And around 2015, our Family Violence Services program started what we know as the Batterer Intervention Program. At the time, we had a male facilitator, and our manager Desiree, they went back for training, and they went back to the Duluth, back in Minnesota, and they learned about the curriculum that they teach there. And so they brought it back here, and it's we use the Duluth curriculum. There's two different books that we use. One is the women's curriculum. It's designed for women to draw from their strengths, provide education, and it supports them through their journey of living a violent-free life. When working with the ladies, it probably takes about 4 or 5 group sessions to learn if they are responsive violence users or battered violence using against their intimate partner. So either case, we use the nonviolent curriculum to guide them on living a violent-free life. And the Duluth people that created the curriculum, they reported that of the ladies that completed, that there's a less than 8% rearrest rate. And for the men's curriculum, it's designed to retrain the thought process of intimate partner violence. when we first see men in groups, they're really angry, mad, and upset. They're blaming their victim for why they're there. They really minimize the abuse that they use, whether it's pushing or blocking their partner from leaving the room. But it takes probably about between 2 and 4 months when they really start to realize that they're truly using abuse on their partner. And we talk about the control log with them. The types of violence are coercion or threats, intimidation, emotional and verbal abuse, isolation, minimizing or denying abuse, using their children, or using male privilege, or economic abuse. So then they really start to realize that there's more than just physical abuse. And then they start accepting, and they really start to learn the ways. That's something that we try to teach is when you're in that relationship and there you have differences, we teach that there's other ways to speak and to have those differences without using those abuses. We've used our curriculum, we use worksheets, we have lengthy conversations, we engage the men, we expect them to talk back with us, we use games, we've shown videos, and even the men, they will have a skit about the abuse that got them into the program. And it's been really eye-opening for the men to realize what they see from a victim standpoint, as well as them reenacting what they've done with a clear mind. Because a lot of times they use drugs and alcohol, but it's a choice. It's a choice, and we tell them that. But like I said, when they act it out, and then we sit them down and they discuss it, they really, we've had some men get real emotional. Wow, I see what I've done. So it's impacted them quite a bit. And we often talk about the actions, the intents, the beliefs, and the effects on themselves, their victim, their community. It takes them, it kind of takes them a bit to really realize how everybody's affected by violence. And so it gives them, a better understanding of what they've gone through, what our community members see, what they've gone through, as well as our victims and children. There's a section of the curriculum that covers the parenting after abuse. And this is a time that the men, they start to see what they've put their children through. That they see that their kids are real vulnerable, and that they hear yelling even while they're sleeping. Because a lot of times people, they are in denial. Well, I was sleeping, or they didn't hear me. But so they realize what they've put their children through and how it's affected them. From the men, we hear that their children are angry at them, that they have no trust with them, or even there's been some times where their children has gotten in the middle and trying to break up their fights. We have a coordinated community response meeting. We hold it quarterly, and we invite our law enforcement, our judges, our court administration, probation, our own program, family violence, the Office of Legal Counsel. We have an attorney that specializes in violence against women. And here we talk about the progress of each individual that's in our group. We've created a monthly compliance report that we share with the courts and we keep in their files. We tell about we talk about the progress that they've made. We keep individual notes. Sometimes somebody might be having trouble or they're not utilizing their other community resources to help themselves, so we just make note of it so that all community or all the response team is aware of what's going on. We've changed our graduated sentencing form. Before, our members, when they were terminated from our program, they would have to wait 90 days before re-entering, but we've changed it and they have to go through court and get sanctioned. It really depends on how many times they've been terminated. And the judge will make that determination as well as the prosecutor, but once that's gone on, instead of waiting 90 days, they can come back at 30 days. Before, when the men are convicted in our courts, I conduct a 2-hour intake, and we talk about the men's past, all the way back to their childhood, and a lot of times they speak about they've watched their mom being beat up or by her boyfriend or their father, and they talk about the predominant aggressor beating them up as well. I would say about 4 out of 6 that I've interviewed have said that they also have become a victim of violence in the home. Our program is 52 weeks long, and after they've gone through the process, we do a completion paperwork with them. We probably about 2 weeks before they complete, we ask them to do this homework, and we ask them to share words with members that are left behind, but also to give us their take on what they've learned. And I brought a few excerpts from some, and somebody said, I would just encourage them to stick with it, not because the courts say so, but for their personal benefit and growth. Another one said, my eyes and mind are open to so much now, because I took in what I've learned here. This class, if you let it, can change your life. Even if you feel wrong by being in the class, come with an open mind and willingness to learn. And he said he's a better person because of it. Another gentleman said to do your best to put yourself in to not put yourself in situations where things might escalate. Don't procrastinate, stay clean and sober, have a solid base and support system, fully participate in class. I'm gonna turn it over to Desiree.
In doing this, of course, wanted to make sure that we left some thoughts, some ideas as you move forward in doing the work. Domestic violence and sexual assault, especially in a family home, is very egregious, very nasty, very ugly. And part of what we do as a program is try to learn from the community on what they see. We learn from the victims themselves. We definitely hear from the young kids who talk about what's going on in the home, and from the teenagers. And unless you've actually experienced it recently, sometimes that tends to fade. So when we're teaching other people, we want to ensure that, especially when you're working with tribal people, that you be aware of your own biases when you're working with the children or working with tribal people. Know what you come with when you're going to work with tribal children or tribal victims. Be aware of racism. A lot of people don't want to bring that up, but when it's obvious and out there, it's far better to acknowledge and work with it than to put it behind the doors and make like it doesn't exist. Part of finding solutions that's meaningful for the victims and the children is to be aware of that also. Child and family experiences, again, as system providers, unless you spend meaningful time, not 20 minutes, not 10 minutes, not an hour, but meaningful time with those individuals, you're not going to gain the experiences faced by the children and their family. And the context, if there's 5 children in the home and 2 adults, that context of that violence is different per child and per adult. So spending that quality time with each of them is important, so you have a good picture of what's really going on in the home. Systemic experiences. The United States is got a lot of systems that have developed, and they're all based on pretty much 2-3 ways. So understanding that the systems that were developed from time before to today have protocols, policies that some should not exist. And part of that includes the racism that comes with those systemic experiences, be it child protection services, including domestic violence and sexual assault advocates. Sometimes they're not as good as they believe that they are. So any system could have been a part of that negative or positive experience. Historical and current traumas are important. A lot of people want to gloss over historical trauma because it seems like it's an elusive piece to take care of. But when you sit and have these meaningful conversations with the family, and if you understand the tribal community that you're serving, not just in who and what they are and what their rich culture is, part of it is also understanding that trauma from the land. For instance, when I train law enforcement officers, I always hear from them that when they drive up to the home, all the children are jumping out the windows or hitting out the back door. And they get upset because they blame the parents. Well, the parents must be teaching them to hate the police officers. But back in the 70s, and this is just one instance, there are many other instances that I'm not aware of. But back in the 70s, before I joined the military, I lived here for a short time, and it was not uncommon for tribal law enforcement to harm our people physically. Find them along the roads and back roads, beat the heck out of them, maim them, find them along the rivers, hurt them. And there was a term that our law enforcement had for doing that. It was something they were proud of. Please know that our tribal law enforcement are mostly Caucasian, not enrolled members. That's a historical trauma to this land. So now you have kind of an understanding of why law enforcement, some of our people are weary around, especially our children. understanding those traumas are important. The impacts of trauma you are probably already aware of. Policy versus meaningfully. So how do you want to check mark? Yeah, I did this, I did that, I got their name, I got their ages, I know where they live. Yeah, we've got a family home we want to put them in. Policy. Meaningful? What do the children say? What does the family say? What does the tribe say? What impacts them in a way that's beneficial? What's part of a negative outcome? And how do we address those? So, policy versus meaningful. Context, again, like I mentioned, if you have 5 children and 2 adults, that context from each of the different kids is going to be very different. Their adults' context is going to be very, if you don't have that context, providing meaningful services to benefit those that you're here to serve, it's going to be skewed. Stocking can include the use of children. More often than not, what seems like a nice gift from the father is detrimental to the family's safety. But you need to know what intimate partner violence is. You need to know what stalking is. Giving them a cell phone, having the location turned on, a small way. Yes, they think it's great because they can have communication, but it causes a lot of harm. I've had to deal with a family of domestic violence with kids where he was in prison, had his brother buy cell phones for his 2 kids who were teenagers in another state. It was their 3rd state they ran to for safety. And they were wondering why he got a hold of them again. Because the system thought, what a nice father. He's buying them a phone. The system thought. Coping and survival methods. Again, the context is very different from person to person, from child to child, depending on the kind of support they have. And part of this is, if they're moved into a home, I mean, the trauma already is them being removed from their home. The trauma is seeing the domestic violence. The trauma is being pulled away and pulled into a system, and now somebody they don't know is supposed to be taking care of them. Understanding why they're coping, or how they're coping, and the survival method that they have is just that. Yes, they may be acting up. Yes, they may be giving you silent treatment. Yes, they may be running away. Trauma is huge, just some mindfulness. Please, these are just a variety of pieces. I already said a lot of them. Ensuring that community-based advocates are at the table. Mental health, highly important for children of domestic violence, sexual assault. Not prescribed very often. I would say in my experience, 1 out of 20, where the children are in a system that they are provided mental health therapists to deal with the trauma that they lived with, to deal with the trauma that they're facing and living through right now because they've been torn away from their home. And it should be ongoing. It shouldn't be a one-time thing. Oh yeah, they look fine, especially the teens. They look fine, they're doing great. We deal with teenagers who are cutters. Because no one's believing them. No one's hearing them. No one has their context. So I must not be real. We have about 8 minutes. Are there questions? Yes.
Is domestic violence prevalent in all over? And the way I ask this because I had a young lady stay with me last year for a few months, and she shared with me the horrible violence that was taking place. She shared with me the horrible violence that was taking place within her community, but that was in New Mexico. Mexico, I think it was. And it sounded to me that, when I asked her, well, what you do with, tribal members, she said, nobody pays attention. Girls are being raped every day. Yeah, she said she had gone through that, and it's like, you just live through it. It's unusual.
Well, it sounds unusual because of the day and age and where we're located. Unfortunately, domestic violence and sexual assault is high on tribal nations. Again, when I said the statistics earlier, the majority of the offenders are non-native. Remember, on tribal lands, tribes didn't have any recourse for the non-natives who perpetrated the violence against Native women on tribal land. My fight with the state.
That's really hard to believe, isn't it? I just think that's really hard to believe or to understand why that would be that way. It's like you could prosecute anybody who did a crime.
I would agree. However, federal governments, long history of the United States,
Right.
federal government, first of all, would not allow us to exist, the tribal nations to exist. When we fought to exist, like the Umatilla Indian Reservation, we fought to exist. There were two things. One, they wanted the crimes to either belong to the feds or crimes to belong just tribal on tribal belong to the tribe, and some crimes that happened on a tribal reservation could go to the state. And our tribe fought for, it was Public Law 280, our tribe fought for taking over a majority of our major crimes, which included partner violence. But that was the Fed's mandate. Now remember, the federal government ensured that tribal nations were pushed onto reservations. We didn't want to go, but we had to. And in doing that, the federal government and the state government wanted to be able to work with tribal nations, but tribal nations, in order to have their own governance, they've always had their governance, but our governance of our people did not look the same as the United States. So the United States wanted us to create documents so that our existence fit United States norms. So tribal nations were learning not too long ago to be able to govern ourselves with the same kind of paperwork the United States says we have to have. Coupled with the fact that in 1994, Office of Violence Against Women didn't exist until 1995, but the talk about violence against women existed back then. And funding was provided to states to provide those services. And the states would get that and then funnel it out to the programs within the state. So, which didn't include tribes at the time, only included the states. So the state's been receiving monies to serve our tribes since about 1995. Unfortunately, that fear of, how do I work with a tribe? How do I say this? How do I provide solutions for them? How do I go out on the reservation when for a majority of those years, it was like, don't go out to the reservation and be killed. So that historical piece comes into play. So 2010 was the first time 3 tribes were able to prosecute non-tribal offenders in tribal court for domestic violence only. Yes. Other questions? Yes.
Does the tribe have victimless prosecution?
Victimless prosecution.
It's the reason why I asked, it's something we're trying to get legislation for. I worked with Wallowa County Batterer Intervention, so I'm a facilitator for BAP as well. It's something we're trying, just because you'll have the female victim who at the beginning wants to prosecute and then decides not to because of the fear factor.
Correct. Our tribe in 2008, 2009, had our first victimless prosecution on domestic violence. The difficulty is that But if you look at the state numbers, they're not that high either. That difficulty is usual, is customary. We have to rely on investigators. Most investigators are men. Most investigators are Caucasian. The United States was built on the foundation that men are the head of the household. And women, of course, were not, were considered property. So for a woman who's usually the victim of intimate partner violence to be able to push for a resolution in regards to this kind of a conflict and to step forward is very, very hard, because a lot of people in the systems are not airing their dirty laundry. Keep that home. Who do you think you are? To the point where even families find it very hard to listen to their adult daughters say, I don't know how to get out of this. And as a battery intervention facilitator, I'm sure you hear it, like we hear it, the victims love their partner. They just don't want the behavior. So for a successful prosecution that's victimless, a law enforcement officer must be able to be very biased and do the investigation necessary. Well, we always teach the officers that if you do it as a homicide prevention, we would get somewhere. But you're counting on law enforcement to do their job, you're counting on the prosecutor to do their job. He or she's going to be bought in on doing that without the victim, and the judge is going to be comfortable in allowing for that to happen without the victim. So there has not been success overall for victimless prosecution, but I'd love to see it move forward. Other questions?
I had a question.
Yes.
When I was listening to the presentation, there was a lot of references back to a lot of these incidents happening during, there's a lot of alcohol involved. So is part of your program also maybe helping them with, it sounds like there's some substance abuse, maybe some addiction issues ongoing. How do you guys look at that? And is that part of what you guys treat that as well?
We don't treat alcohol or drugs for neither the victim nor the offenders. What we do with the victims is, it is a lot about what the victim wants and where she wants to go with everything. So we provide the options. We kind of lay out a skeleton map, per se, of these are the different things we're seeing that's going on. These are what we're looking at as far as your safety. We will never say, you've got to quit the alcohol and your drugs. We will never say that. That's up to them. But we do talk about those options of, well, what's going to happen if you drink again and go out and party then. And it's still up to them. We do provide warm handoffs to alcohol and drug program. And I wish I could say that the system is perfect, but I know that it's not. To find somebody who looks like us in the alcohol and drug realm that's going to do this in a way that benefits the victim, it's very hard. To find, for the offenders, it's in a lot of our curriculum and how we deal with it, a lot of our check-ins in regards to that too. Most of them are already mandated to A&B assessment, mental health assessment, follow up the treatment. We know that alcohol and drug is not the cause of domestic violence, but it definitely exacerbates it all the more. And we always talk about choice. So even for the offenders, it's going to be the same thing. We can't force them. We can't tell them, well, courts, because they're on probation, and we can say you can't be doing this. But we work with the alcohol and drug program to encourage them to continue going. We're trying to get alcohol and drug program to be a part of our coordinated community response for our batteries intervention. That's been slow going. Other questions? It's a tough subject. It's a hard subject. But it's one that we find very important for our people. Understand that there used to be a few 100 billion of us. For the Umatilla hormones and car use, there used to be over 100,000 of us. Now there's only a little over 3,000 of us. So for intimate partner violence and for battery intervention, re-education, it's highly important for our program. Along with that, children are our key. Our tribe does a lot in regards to comprehensive plan for the next 7 to 10 years. So we work under that umbrella for the tribe and looking at those long term. Greatly appreciate your time and your attention. Definitely appreciate your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.